One name for God in Jewish tradition is the wise knower of secrets. We read in the Talmud that one who sees the multitudes of Israel gathered together recites these words, Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, chacham harazim. Blessed are you, Adonai, wise knower of secrets. What does this name mean? The text explains that when God looks out over a sea of people, God doesn't just see a mass. God realizes that no two people look alike, no two people think alike, and God knows the heart of every individual. This week, along with 250 members of our central community, including Rabbi Bookdahl, our clergy team, our president, Shani Silverberg, and nearly 300,000 other people, I took part in the March for Israel in Washington, D.C. Indeed, we were a multitude, vast in our numbers and dazzling in our diversity. We stood together, a sea of blue and white, on the National Mall, young and old, observant and secular, Israeli and American, Jews and non-Jews, each of us there for our own reasons, our hearts overwhelmed by profound emotions, sadness, solidarity, fear, anger, love. For me, and maybe for you as well, these last weeks have felt like wading through a dark fog, grieving the loss of over 1,200 men, women, and children massacred and mutilated by terrorists bent on genocide, praying for the safe return of all of the hostages, and watching anti-Semitic incidents in the US rise by 400% since October 7th. On Tuesday, I felt that fog lift when I heard our central teens erupt in screams of Am Yisrael Chai and bring them home. When I listened to speakers who insisted the world see the faces of the people they love, who were kidnapped from their homes and have been buried under the earth for 42 days in Gaza. During these past few weeks, I have been thinking of Purim, the dark story of an attempted genocide against the Jews by King Ahasuerus and his advisor Haman years ago in Persia, the ancient name of Iran. When Mordechai, one hero of the story, heard of Haman's plan and the king's decree, says the book of Esther, he went into mourning, crying out bitterly as he walked through the city. I tried to imagine how he felt as he walked and wept, facing the existential terror of a future without his people in it. From the streets of Persia, we hear an echo of this week's Torah portion, Parshat Toldot. Toldot tells the story of Jacob and Esau, the twin sons of Isaac and Rebekah, from whom two clashing nations grow, the people of Israel and the Edomites, a biblical enemy of Jacob's descendants. This division was seeded when the twins each wanted their father Isaac's blessing, but there was only one to give. Nearing death, Isaac prepared to give Esau, his firstborn son, his blessing, and a double portion of inheritance. Rebekah heard this and was determined for her son Jacob to receive the blessing instead. So she disguised Jacob, her favorite son, as Esau. Isaac then gave Jacob the birthright blessing intended for Esau, a promise of fertility, prosperity, and power. When Esau learned what happened, he cried out in anguish, "Have you but one blessing, Father? Bless me too." It is striking that the Torah uses the same phrase in both of these stories. Both Mordechai and Esau lift their voices in great and bitter weeping. Tz'akah gedolah umorah. They both cry out in pain and in fear, desperately worried about their future. And it is even more striking that the sages of the Midrash connect these two cries across the centuries, arguing that we Jews must listen to Esau's cries as well as the cries of the Jew Mordechai, that we must acknowledge the suffering of another people echoing through history, held alongside the pain of the Jewish people. Our Torah is known for its stark, sparing use of detail. Yet it has a remarkable capacity for portraying the pain of other peoples, for insisting that we pay attention to the suffering of others. Just as the Torah wants us to hear Esau's cries, it also shows us Hagar the Egyptian, lonely and frightened in the wilderness when she is cast out of Abraham's house with her son Ishmael, weeping in fear for her child, who will become the ancestor of Arab nations. In the book of Judges, not only do we see Sisera, the general of an enemy army, we see Sisera's mother, anxiously waiting by the window for her son to come home from war, unaware that he has been killed. In fact, our sages liken her cries to the cries of Sarah, whom they imagine crying for Isaac when she learned that Abraham bound him to the altar. Each time we hear the shofar blown at the new year, our sages instruct, we should remember the sound of both Isaac's mother and Sisera's mother crying out. Our tradition calls us to identify passionately and full-heartedly with our own people, to love our fellow Jews as we love our family, to cry with them in times of grief, to help them, stand up for them, and speak out for them in times of danger. And as you leave the sanctuary tonight, you will have the opportunity to pick up a prayer card with the name and age of a hostage, and also postcards for legislators with advocacy steps to demand the release of all hostages. And we cannot stop praying or advocating until they have all come home. Our tradition also asks us to do something extraordinary as well, to keep our hearts open, to hold the pain of another people alongside our own, even when the weight of all that pain becomes almost unbearable. Our tradition wants us to learn the lesson of never again, to be clear about our enemies, but also to be clear about the value of every innocent life. It wants us to strengthen our capacity for empathy and understanding born of shared grief. That is why we are commanded to love our neighbor, and just a few verses later, to love the stranger, to see the stranger as worthy of compassion, dignity, and a flourishing future for their children alongside our own. Even now, even in the midst of this dark and terrible time, our tradition continues to summon us to the highest human capacities. It asks us to find within ourselves the strength to look at multitudes of people, even those beyond our borders, the way that God might look at them, not as a faceless mass, but as a crowd of individuals, each with their own stories, their own concerns, their own pain, fears, and dreams. It asks us to find room in our heart for our pain and the pain of others, room to hear Palestinian parents weeping for their children, even as Jewish parents weep for theirs. Empathy is our moral inheritance as Jews. The Torah gives us the story of Esau to teach us that our Jewish stories intertwine always with the stories of others. Esau's descendants are recorded in the book of Genesis alongside the descendants of his brother Jacob. Empathy is the starting point for a shared future, a better future marked by new blessing. Hagar, lost in the wilderness, weeps in despair, but God opens her eyes and shows her a well to save her life and the life of her son. The Torah gives us her story so that we will never cease to hope. Sometimes my own grief is so overwhelming that I can't reach the heights of empathy and compassion, but I'm trying, and like Hagar, I will never give up. Shabbat Shalom.